There is a silent leak in your life right now. You don't hear it. You don't see it. But every single day, it is draining your future, not your time, not your energy, your money. And the most dangerous part? You've been trained not to notice. You've been trained to earn it, spend it, repeat, to celebrate payday, and fear the end of the month, to feel rich for a moment and restricted for the rest. And if you're honest with yourself, you've felt that cycle, that quiet pressure, that invisible weight. You work hard, but somehow it never feels like enough. Now here's the truth most people never hear clearly. It's not because you don't earn enough. It's because you don't control what you earn. In this audiobook, Control Every Dollar, you're going to learn how the 1% think about money, how they move with it, and most importantly, how they never let a single dollar drift without direction. Because to them, money is not something they spend. It's something they deploy. And over the next chapters, you will discover a system simple in structure, powerful in execution, that transforms every dollar into a decision and every decision into control. We're going to break down how the wealthy actually structure their money behind the scenes, why most people are unknowingly trained to stay financially reactive, how to divide your income with precision so it builds instead of disappears, the hidden psychology of spending and how to master it, and the system that allows you to grow wealth even if you're starting from zero. This is not financial advice. This is financial awareness. Because once you see clearly, you can't go back to blindness. Here's a line I want you to remember. Every dollar you don't control controls you. Let that sink in. Because this audiobook is not about becoming rich overnight. It's about becoming impossible to control. If that idea resonates with you, if even a small part of you is tired of guessing where your money went, then this is your moment. And if you're listening right now, make this a quiet contract with yourself. Not with me, with yourself. That from this point forward, you will pay attention, because attention is where control begins. Now take a breath, because chapter 1 is where everything shifts. Chapter 1, The Illusion of Income. Most people believe income is power. They believe that the more they earn, the more control they have. But let me ask you something. If income was power, why do so many high earners still feel trapped? Why do people making six figures still live paycheck to paycheck? Why do bonuses disappear faster than they arrive? Because income without structure is chaos, and chaos always wins when there is no system to contain it. The truth is, income is not control, income is opportunity, and most people waste it. Think about your last paycheck. Not what you intended to do with it, what actually happened. Bills, subscriptions, small purchases that felt harmless in the moment, and then silence. The money disappears, and all that's left is a vague memory of spending it. That's not control, that's drift. And drift is dangerous, because drift feels normal. It doesn't feel like failure, it doesn't feel like a mistake, it feels like life. But the 1% see it differently. They don't see money as something that comes and goes. They see it as something that must be assigned before it moves. Every dollar has a destination before it ever arrives, and that one shift changes everything. Because if you don't tell your money where to go, it will always find a way to disappear. Now here's where it gets deeper. The system you've been living in was never designed to teach you control. It was designed to keep you moving. working, spending, repeating. Not because someone is targeting you personally, but because a reactive consumer is predictable, and predictability is profitable. You get paid, you feel relief. You spend, you feel temporary reward. Then the cycle resets, and the entire time, you believe you're in control. But control isn't about having money. Control is about directing it. And that's what separates the 1% from everyone else. Not just how much they earn, but how much they command. So let me ask you something honestly. Right now, if I asked you where every dollar from your last month went, could you answer without guessing? Could you point to each decision with clarity? Or would you feel that familiar uncertainty, that quiet realization that most of it just slipped through? That feeling right there, that's the gap. And in this audiobook, we are going to close it because the moment you become aware, you begin to take back control. And once you take control, everything changes. But awareness alone is not enough. Because in the next chapter, you're going to discover something even more uncomfortable, something most people avoid completely. The truth about ownership and why, if you don't own anything, you are being owned. Chapter 2. If you don't own, you serve. There's a line buried deep inside one of the transcripts you shared that captures a brutal truth most people never stop to question. If you don't own something, you are what's owned. Let that sit with you for a moment. Because this isn't about business jargon. This isn't about sounding smart. This is about reality. Look at the world around you. There are people who own systems. And there are people who operate inside them. There are people who own platforms and people who scroll them. There are people who own assets and people who fund them. And here's where it becomes uncomfortable. Most people spend their entire lives working to support things they will never own. They build someone else's dream, fund someone else's growth, and then wonder why their own life feels stuck. Now, this is not about blaming jobs. This is not about saying employment is wrong. This is about understanding position. Because if your income only comes from your time, you are always one decision away from zero, and that is not control. That is dependency. The 1% understands something early. Ownership is leverage, and leverage is freedom. That's why entrepreneurs build systems. That's why investors buy assets. That's why creators develop rare skills, because ownership separates effort from income. Think about that. If you stop working today, what continues to pay you? Most people never ask that question because it's uncomfortable. But discomfort is where awareness begins. Now, let's go deeper. Ownership doesn't always start big. It doesn't require millions. It doesn't require connections. It starts with something much simpler. A shift in thinking. From consumer to controller, from spender to allocator, from reactive to intentional. Because before you can own assets, you have to own your money. And most people don't. They earn it, but they don't own it. Because the moment it arrives, it's already assigned by habits they never questioned. Rent, bills, subscriptions, impulse purchases. The money's gone before they ever think about it. That's not ownership. That's automation without awareness. And here's the hard truth. You cannot build ownership on top of unconscious spending. It will collapse every time. So the first level of ownership is not buying property, not starting a company. It's controlling the flow, because control creates surplus, and surplus creates options, and options create ownership. This is where everything begins. Now imagine this. Two people earn the exact same income, same job, same salary. But one of them directs every dollar with intention, and the other lets it flow without structure. 5 years later, they are not in the same place, not even close, because one built assets and the other built expenses. One created leverage, the other created dependency, and from the outside, it looks like luck. But it's not luck, it's structure, and that's what you're about to build. Because in the next chapter, we are going to break down the system, not theory, not motivation, a real framework, a way to divide your money. So it starts working for you instead of disappearing from you. This is where control becomes practical. This is where awareness turns into action. And once you see it, you'll never look at your income the same way again. Because the next step is learning how to assign every dollar before it ever touches your hands. Dear friend, you are definitely on the right track if you are watching this video. Like, subscribe, and write in the comments which topic or problem concerns you the most. We promise to prepare a professional video explanation at your request. Chapter 3. The assignment before arrival. Most people wait until money arrives to decide what to do with it. That's the mistake, because by the time money reaches your hands, emotion is already waiting for it. And emotion is expensive. It tells you that you deserve something, that you've earned a break, that this purchase won't matter. And just like that, the decision is no longer logical, it's emotional. And emotional money never builds anything lasting. The 1% operate differently. They don't wait to decide, they decide first. Before the money arrives, they already know where it's going. Every dollar has a job, not a hope, not a guess, a job. Because money without a job becomes noise. It scatters, it disappears, it leaves nothing behind. But money with a job builds. Now here's where it becomes practical. You need a system, not motivation, not discipline alone. A system that removes decision fatigue and replaces it with clarity. Because the goal is not to think harder about money. The goal is to think less and control more. So let's introduce the structure, a simple framework that divides every dollar into purpose. 4 directions, 4 responsibilities, 4 roles your money must play: growth, security, lifestyle, freedom. And every dollar you earn must be assigned to one of these, no exceptions. Because if you skip this step, you fall back into drift. Let's start with the first, growth. This is where your future is built, not your current comfort, not your present life, your future. This is the money that does not belong to you today. It belongs to the version of you that hasn't arrived yet. And most people ignore this category completely. They say, I'll invest later. I'll save when I earn more. I'll figure it out when things are stable. But stability never comes from delay. It comes from consistency, even small amounts, even when it feels insignificant. Because growth is not about size. It's about repetition. Every single month, you are either planting something or consuming everything. And most people consume, which is why years pass and nothing changes. Now here's the key. This category is not optional. It is not if there's money left. It is first, before lifestyle, before comfort. Because if you don't pay your future first, your future will always feel behind. Now let's move to the second, security. This is your protection, your buffer, your breathing room. Life is unpredictable, unexpected costs, moments you didn't plan for. And without security, Every surprise becomes a crisis. Every disruption becomes stress. But with security, you stay calm. You stay in control. You make decisions from strength, not panic. This is what separates stability from survival, because survival reacts. Stability absorbs, and most people are living in survival mode without even realizing it. Now the third, lifestyle. This is where most people spend everything. Comfort, experiences, daily living, and there is nothing wrong with this. You are meant to enjoy your life, but here's the difference. The 1% enjoy what they can afford. After they've secured their future, not before. They don't sacrifice tomorrow. To feel good today, they earn the right to spend. That's the difference. And finally, freedom. This is where most people never reach, because they never create space for it. Freedom is optionality. It's the ability to choose, to say no, to step back, to move without pressure. And it only comes when your money stops controlling your decisions and starts supporting them. Now take a moment, because this is where everything shifts. Up until now, money has probably felt reactive, something you deal with, something that comes and goes. But from this point forward, money becomes structured, directed, controlled, because every dollar has a place. And once you start assigning it, before it arrives, you remove chaos from the system. You remove emotion from the moment. You remove randomness from your future, and what's left is control. But here's the part most people don't expect. The system is simple. Executing it is not. Because in the next chapter, you're going to face the real challenge. Not numbers, not percentages, your behavior. Because the biggest threat to your money is not your income. It's your habits. And if you don't master them, no system will save you. Chapter 4. The War Between Discipline and Desire. The system is not the hard part. Let's be honest. What you just heard is simple, clear, logical, structured. 4 categories. Assign your money. Stay consistent. That's not complicated. So why do most people fail? Because money is not just numbers. It's emotion, it's identity, it's behavior, and behavior is where everything breaks. You can understand everything perfectly and still sabotage yourself the moment your emotions take over. Because in real life, discipline doesn't show up when things are easy. It shows up when you're tired, when you feel like you deserve something, when you want relief more than you want progress. That's the moment where most people lose control. Not because they're stupid, not because they're lazy, because they never trained themselves to pause. Think about it. How many times have you spent money not because you needed something, but because you felt something? Stress, boredom, frustration, even celebration. Money becomes a response, a reaction. And reaction is the opposite of control. The 1% understand this deeply. They don't just manage money. They manage themselves, because they know if you can't control your impulses, you will never control your finances. Now here's something uncomfortable. Most spending is not logical. It's emotional storytelling. You tell yourself, it's not that expensive. I'll make it back. I need this. But if you slow down, if you really look at it, you'll realize something powerful. You're not buying the thing, you're buying the feeling, and feelings fade fast, but the financial consequences stay. This is why discipline is everything, not extreme discipline, not punishment, controlled awareness, the ability to pause between the impulse and the action. Because in that pause, you take your power back. Now imagine this. Every time you feel the urge to spend, You don't say no immediately. You just pause. You ask one question. Which category does this belong to? Growth? Security? Lifestyle? Freedom? If it doesn't clearly fit, it doesn't happen. That one question will change everything because it forces awareness, it forces intention, it breaks the automatic cycle. And once the cycle is broken, you start to see clearly. You start to notice patterns. You start to realize how often you were spending without thinking. That awareness is uncomfortable, but it's necessary because you cannot fix what you refuse to see. Now let's go deeper. Discipline is not about restriction. It's about alignment. It's making sure your actions match your goals. Because here's the truth most people avoid. Everyone says they want financial freedom, but their daily decisions say something completely different. And money listens to behavior, not intentions. So if your behavior is scattered, your results will be scattered. If your behavior is controlled, your results will follow. Now here's a line I want you to remember. Your money reflects your habits, not your hopes. Let that stay with you, because the system you're building only works if you respect it. And respect shows up in small decisions, not big moments. Daily choices, quiet discipline, the ability to say no when nobody is watching. That's where control is built. Now here's where most people fail next. They try to change everything at once. They go from no structure to extreme restriction, and it doesn't last because it's not sustainable. The goal is not perfection. The goal is consistency. Small shifts, repeated daily, because consistency compounds, just like spending does. And over time, those small decisions create massive separation between where you are and where you could be. But in the next chapter, we're going to talk about something even more subtle, something most people never question. The invisible spending that quietly destroys progress. The money you don't even notice leaving. Because if you don't uncover it, you will always feel like you're doing everything right and still not moving forward. Chapter 5. The Invisible Leak. There is a type of spending that never feels dangerous. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't trigger guilt. It doesn't even feel like spending. And that's exactly why it destroys more progress than anything else. Because the most dangerous expenses are the ones you don't notice. Not the big purchases, not the obvious mistakes, the small, silent, repeated decisions that slip through your awareness day after day, week after week, month after month, until one day you look at your situation and ask yourself, where did it all go? This is the invisible leak, and almost everyone has it. Subscriptions you forgot about. Small daily purchases you justify instantly. Convenience costs that feel harmless in the moment. It's not one decision. It's the accumulation. Because here's the truth. You don't lose control of your money in one moment. You lose it in patterns. Patterns that feel normal. Patterns that feel harmless. Patterns that add up. Now think about this carefully. If I asked you to cut one large expense, you would feel it immediately. You would notice the change. You would adjust your behavior. But if I asked you to track every small expense, that's where resistance appears. Because it feels unnecessary. It feels tedious. It feels like too much effort. And that's exactly why most people avoid it. But avoidance is what keeps the leak alive. The 1% don't ignore small numbers. They respect them because they understand something powerful. Small money is still money, and when it moves without awareness, it compounds in the wrong direction. Now here's where it gets deeper. Invisible spending is not just about money, it's about attention. Every unnoticed expense is a moment where you were not present, where you acted automatically, where you gave control without realizing it. And that pattern doesn't just exist in money, it shows up everywhere. Time, energy, focus. Because the way you handle small things is the way you handle everything. So if you ignore small spending, you are training yourself to ignore control. Now imagine reversing that. Imagine becoming aware of every single outflow, not obsessively, not emotionally, clearly, calmly, like someone observing, not reacting. At first, it feels uncomfortable because you start to see the truth, how often you spend without thinking, how often you justify things instantly, how often you choose convenience over intention. But then something shifts. You start to slow down. You start to question. You start to decide instead of react. And that's where power returns. Now here's a simple practice. For the next 7 days, track everything. Not roughly, not around this much. Everything. Every coffee, every app, every small purchase. Write it down or log it. But don't skip anything, because this is not about judgment. It's about awareness. And awareness will show you patterns you've never seen before. You'll notice how often spending is emotional, how often it's impulsive, how often it's unnecessary. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's when control begins. Because now, you're not guessing, you're observing. And observation leads to correction. Now here's the shift I want you to make. Stop thinking of small expenses as harmless. Start seeing them as signals. Signals of behavior, signals of habits, signals of control or lack of it. Because once you master the small, the big becomes easy. But if you ignore the small, the big will always feel impossible. Now let me give you a line to hold on to. Big financial problems are built from small ignored decisions. And once you understand that, you stop underestimating the details. You start respecting them, because details are where control lives. Now in the next chapter, we're going to take this even further, because awareness is powerful, but it's not enough on its own. You need a structure that forces consistency, a system that works even when you don't feel like it, because discipline fades, motivation disappears, but systems remain. And the next step is building one that runs whether you're perfect or not. Mate, write which city you're from. It's interesting to see which corners of the world are watching our videos. Chapter 6. The system that runs without you. Motivation is unreliable. Let's start there. You've felt it before. That surge of energy. That moment where everything feels clear. Where you say, this time, I'm going to be different. And for a few days, maybe a week, you are. You track your spending. You think before you buy. You feel in control. And then, life happens. You get tired. You get distracted. You fall back into old habits. Not because you failed. Because you relied on motivation. And motivation is a temporary emotion. The 1% don't rely on motivation. They rely on systems, because systems don't care how you feel. They run anyway. And that's the difference. Because if your financial control depends on your mood, you will lose it the moment life gets busy. But if your system runs automatically, you stay in control, even on your worst days. Now let's build that. Not a complicated structure, not something overwhelming, something simple but powerful. The goal is this: remove decision-making. from the moment money arrives, because decisions made in the moment are influenced by emotion. But decisions made in advance are driven by logic. So here's what you do. You create separation, not mentally, physically. Different accounts, different spaces, different purposes. The moment money enters your life, it gets divided immediately. No delay, no hesitation, because delay creates temptation, and temptation creates mistakes. So instead of thinking, I'll manage it later, you say, it's already decided. Growth account, security account, lifestyle account, freedom account. Each one receives its portion automatically. And once it's there, it stays there. No mixing, no borrowing, no, I'll put it back later. Because that's how systems break. Now here's the key insight. You are not restricting yourself. You are protecting your future. Because once money is assigned, it's no longer available for impulse. And that removes pressure. You don't have to think, should I spend this? Because the answer is already built into the system. If it's in your lifestyle category, you can spend it freely. No guilt, no hesitation, because it's controlled. But if it's not there, it's not an option. That clarity is freedom. Now let's talk about something important. Most people resist this step, not because it's hard, because it feels limiting. They think, I don't want to restrict my money. I want flexibility. But here's the truth. Unstructured money feels like freedom until it disappears. Then it feels like stress. Real freedom comes from knowing exactly what you can do without consequences. That's what a system gives you. Boundaries, but not limitations. Direction, not restriction. Because when your money is organized, your mind becomes calm. No guessing, no confusion, no anxiety about where it went. You already know. Now imagine living like that every month, every year, consistently. That's how wealth is built. Not through big wins, through controlled repetition. Now here's a powerful shift. Stop seeing your income as one number. Start seeing it as 4 streams, each with a purpose, each with a role. Because once you do that, money stops feeling overwhelming. It becomes structured, predictable, manageable, and that's when growth accelerates. Because clarity removes friction. Now let me give you a line to anchor this. Systems create results. Even when discipline fades, remember that, because you will have days where you don't feel like tracking, where you don't feel like thinking about money. And that's fine, because your system is already working. But here's the next level, because building the system is only step 1. Protecting it is where most people fail. Because in the next chapter, we're going to talk about something subtle, but dangerous. The moment where people break their own system, the small exceptions that destroy consistency. Because it never happens all at once. It starts with one decision. One, it's fine this time. And that is where control begins to slip again. Chapter 7. The cost of just this. Once. It never starts with failure. It starts with a sentence, a quiet one, a harmless one, just this once. And in that moment, nothing feels broken, nothing feels dangerous, because one exception doesn't feel like a pattern. But that's exactly how patterns begin. You've seen it before. You build a system. You feel in control. You follow it for days, maybe weeks, and then one moment appears. You're tired. You're stressed. You want something now, and you tell yourself, it's fine this time. So you take from your growth. You dip into your security. You blur the lines just a little, and nothing dramatic happens, which is why it feels safe. But something invisible shifts. not in your bank account, in your identity. Because the moment you break your system and allow it, you teach yourself something, that your rules are flexible, that your structure is optional, that discipline is negotiable. And once that belief enters, it spreads. The next time becomes easier. The hesitation becomes weaker. The system becomes softer, until eventually you're back where you started, not because the system didn't work, because you stopped respecting it. This is where most people fail, not in understanding, in consistency, because the truth is, your system will only work if you treat it as non-negotiable, not rigid, not extreme, but respected, because respect creates trust, and trust creates stability. Now let's go deeper. Why do people break their own systems? It's not because they don't care. It's because they want relief in the moment. They want to feel better now. And the easiest way to do that is to spend, to bypass the structure, to choose comfort over control. But here's the reality. Every time you choose short-term relief, you delay long-term freedom. And most people never notice the trade, because it happens quietly over time. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine you feel the urge, the same pressure, the same desire. But instead of reacting, you pause, you recognize it, you let it pass. That moment is where discipline is built, not in big decisions, in small resistances, because discipline is not about saying never. It's about saying not like this. Not from emotion, not without awareness. Now here's a powerful shift. Instead of thinking, I can't spend this, start thinking, I choose not to break my system. That language matters, because one feels like restriction, the other feels like control, and control is empowering. Now let me give you a real-world reflection. Think about people you know who seem financially stable, calm, in control. It's not because they never feel temptation. It's because they don't negotiate with it. They feel it, but they don't follow it. That's the difference. Now here's the line I want you to carry forward. One exception feels small until it becomes your standard, because standards are built from repeated behavior, not intentions. So if you want to protect your system, you don't protect it once. You protect it daily, in small decisions, in quiet moments, in the choices nobody sees. That's where it lives. Now here's the next layer. Because even if you master discipline, even if you protect your system, there is still something that can slow your progress. Something subtle, something most people misunderstand completely. Your income. Because in the next chapter, we're going to challenge something deeply rooted. The belief that earning more will fix everything. And once you see the truth, you'll understand why more money without control changes nothing. Chapter 8. More money won't save you. Most people believe their problem is income. They think, if I just earn more, everything would be fine. And on the surface, that sounds logical. More money means more freedom, right? More comfort, more options, more control. But let me ask you something honestly. Have you ever earned more than you used to and still felt like it wasn't enough? Have you ever had a moment where your income increased, but your situation didn't? That's not an accident. That's a pattern. Because income alone does not create control. It amplifies behavior. If your habits are unstructured, more money doesn't fix them. It expands them. You don't become better with more money. You become more of who you already are. If you spend emotionally, you will spend more emotionally. If you lack structure, you will lose more without structure. If you drift, you will drift at a higher level. And that's why so many people level up their income, but stay in the same financial position, just with bigger numbers. Now think about this carefully. If someone cannot control $1,000, why would they suddenly control $10,000? Nothing changes. The system doesn't exist. The habits don't change. Only the scale increases. And with scale, mistakes become more expensive. This is where the 1% think differently. They don't wait for more money to become disciplined. They become disciplined first because they understand something critical. Income grows when control already exists, not the other way around. Now let's go deeper. There's a concept most people never notice. It's called lifestyle expansion. As income increases, so does spending. Not intentionally. Gradually, better food, better clothes, better experiences. And again, there's nothing wrong with enjoying your life. But without awareness, lifestyle expands to match income, and the gap never grows. And that gap is where wealth lives. If you don't protect it, it disappears, no matter how much you earn. Now imagine two people again, same income increase. One increases their lifestyle and consumes everything extra. The other maintains control. They allow some improvement, but direct the majority into growth. 5 years later, they are living completely different lives. One feels stuck at a higher level. The other has created leverage, assets, security, options. And from the outside, it looks like one got lucky. But it's not luck. It's restraint. It's awareness. It's control. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't have an income problem. They have a management problem. But management is less exciting than earning more. It requires discipline. It requires honesty. It requires looking at your habits without excuses. And that's why most people avoid it. Because it's easier to chase more than to control what you have. But here's the shift. The moment you master your current income, you unlock something powerful: confidence. Because now, you know you can handle more. You trust yourself. You don't fear growth. You don't fear opportunity. Because you've proven something to yourself, that you are in control. Now let me give you a line to carry forward. More money doesn't create discipline. It exposes the lack of it. And once you understand that, you stop waiting. You stop saying, when I earn more. You start working with what you have right now. Because control does not require a higher income. It requires a higher standard. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because once you control your money and protect your system and stop relying on income alone, a new question appears, one that most people never ask. How do I make my money work without me? Because control is the first step, but leverage is the next. And in the next chapter, you're going to discover how money stops being something you manage and starts becoming something that moves on your behalf. Chapter 9. When money starts moving without you. There is a moment, subtle, almost invisible, where everything changes. It doesn't look dramatic. There's no sudden breakthrough, no loud signal that says, you made it. But internally, something shifts. Because for the first time, your money stops depending entirely on your effort and starts creating movement on its own. This is the moment where control evolves into leverage. And most people never reach it, not because it's impossible, but because they never build the foundation required to unlock it. They skip control and chase outcomes. They want returns without discipline, growth without structure, freedom without consistency, and it never works because leverage only works on top of control. Now let's understand this clearly. Up until now, your income has been tied to your time. You work, you earn, you stop, it stops. That's the default system most people live in, and there's nothing wrong with that at the beginning. But if it stays that way forever, you remain dependent, and dependency is the opposite of freedom. The 1% break this pattern, not by working more hours, but by shifting how money behaves. They stop asking, how can I earn more, and start asking, how can what I already have start working? That question changes everything, because now money is no longer the result of effort. It becomes a tool, a multiplier, a silent worker operating in the background. Now here's where we connect this to what you've already built, your growth category. This is where leverage begins. Not immediately, not dramatically, but consistently, because every time you allocate money into growth, you are planting something, and planting requires patience. You don't dig up seeds every week to check if they're growing. You trust the process, you stay consistent, and over time, something invisible becomes visible. Progress. Now let's make this real. Imagine two people again. One spends everything they earn. The other consistently allocates a portion into growth, month after month, year after year. At first, there's no difference. They live similar lives, similar experiences, but then something happens. Time compounds, and suddenly, one person's past decisions start producing results in the present, not because of effort today, but because of discipline yesterday. That's leverage. That's what most people miss. They underestimate time. They want immediate results. But leverage is slow at first, then unstoppable. Now, here's a powerful shift. Stop thinking of growth as sacrifice. Start seeing it as delayed power, because every dollar you place into growth is a future decision already made, a future opportunity already funded, a future version of you already supported. And that perspective changes everything, because now you're not giving something up. You're building something ahead. Now let's go deeper. Leverage is not just about investing money. It's about creating distance between your effort and your income. That can happen through assets, through systems, through skills that scale, but it always starts the same way, with control. Because if you cannot manage small amounts, you cannot multiply large ones. Now imagine this, a version of your life where your money generates movement, where opportunities appear because you prepared for them, where decisions feel calm because you're not dependent on a single source. That's what you're building, not overnight, but deliberately. And every step you've taken so far leads here. Now let me give you a line to hold on to. Money becomes powerful the moment it stops needing you, because that's when your time changes. That's when your choices expand. That's when pressure reduces. But here's the next layer. Because once money starts moving, there is something that can destroy it just as quickly. Something subtle, something emotional, something most people never learn to manage. Fear. Because in the next chapter, we're going to talk about what happens when your money starts growing and your mind starts trying to protect you from it. If you enjoy these audiobooks and want to support the channel, consider joining our private members community. Members get early access to new audiobooks and exclusive wealth lessons. Chapter 10. When growth feels dangerous, there's a strange moment that nobody prepares you for. A moment where things start working. Your system is in place. Your money is structured. Your growth begins to show signs of life. And instead of feeling pure confidence, you feel something else. Hesitation. A quiet voice in your mind starts asking, what if I lose it? What if something goes wrong? What if I make a mistake? And suddenly, the same person who wanted growth starts fearing it. This is where most people slow down. Not because the system failed, because their mindset did not evolve with their progress. Because here's the truth. Growth introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty feels uncomfortable, especially if you spent most of your life avoiding financial risk. Now let's be clear. This is not about reckless decisions. This is not about chasing quick wins. This is about understanding the psychological shift that happens when you move from control to expansion. Because control feels safe, it's structured, predictable, contained, but growth requires movement, and movement always carries risk. The 1% understand this balance. They don't avoid risk, they manage it. They don't freeze when things grow, they adapt, because they know something most people don't. Risk is not the enemy. Ignorance is. Now let's go deeper. Fear in money usually comes from one place, lack of understanding. If you don't understand what you're doing, every movement feels dangerous. Every fluctuation feels like a threat. Every decision feels uncertain. And that's why most people stay small. Because small feels safe, even if it keeps them stuck. But once you start learning, once you start understanding, something changes. You stop reacting emotionally. You start thinking strategically. You stop fearing movement. You start directing it. Now imagine this. You've built your system. You've created consistency. You've started allocating into growth. And for the first time, you see progress, even if it's small. That moment is critical because you have two choices. You can pull back, protect what you have, and slow everything down. Or you can stay consistent, stay calm, and allow the system to continue working. Most people choose the first because fear feels real, because loss feels painful, even when it hasn't happened. But the 1% choose differently. They trust structure, they trust process, they trust consistency, not emotions, because emotions fluctuate. Systems don't. Now, here's a powerful shift. Stop asking, what if I lose? Start asking, what am I learning? Because learning reduces fear. Understanding builds confidence, and confidence allows growth to continue. Now let me give you a line to anchor this. Fear doesn't disappear when you grow. It evolves with you, and your job is not to eliminate it. It's to manage it, to stay grounded, to stay clear, to stay consistent, even when your emotions try to interfere. Because the moment you let fear control your decisions, you return to reaction. And reaction breaks everything you've built. Now here's where it gets even deeper, because fear doesn't just show up when things grow. It also shows up when things slow down, when progress isn't visible, when results take time. And that's what we're going to explore next. Because in the next chapter, you're going to face one of the hardest parts of financial growth. Not losing money. Waiting without proof. Waiting without immediate results. Waiting while staying consistent. Because that is where most people quit. And if you can master that, you become unstoppable. Chapter 11. The discipline of waiting. There is a phase in every journey where nothing seems to be happening. No visible growth, no exciting progress, no clear reward for your effort. just repetition, day after day, month after month. You follow the system, you stay disciplined, you do everything right, and still, it feels quiet. This is where most people stop, not because they failed, because they got impatient, because they expected something faster, something louder, something that proved they were on the right path. But here's the truth. The most powerful growth is invisible at first, just like a seed under the soil. No one sees it, no one praises it, no one believes in it, but it's happening quietly, consistently. And if you dig it up every few days to check if it's growing, you destroy it. That's what most people do with their finances. They start something, they expect immediate results, they don't see them, and they change direction again and again and again. And because of that, nothing compounds, nothing builds, nothing lasts. The 1% understand something different. They understand time. They understand patience. They understand that consistency beats intensity every single time. Now let's go deeper. Waiting is uncomfortable because it feels like inaction. It feels like stagnation. It feels like you're not moving forward, but that's an illusion because growth is not always visible, especially in the early stages. You are building habits. You are building structure. You are building discipline. And those things take time to translate into results. Now imagine this. You've been following your system for 3 months. You've controlled your spending. You've allocated into growth. You've stayed consistent. But nothing dramatic has changed. Your life looks almost the same. That's the moment most people question everything. Is this working? Should I do something different? Am I wasting time? And that's where they break, because they mistake silence for failure. But silence is part of the process, because real growth is not instant. It's layered, and every layer strengthens the next. Now let me give you a shift that will change everything. Stop measuring progress by what you see today. Start measuring it by what you're building consistently. Because if your system is working, if your habits are aligned, if your behavior is controlled, then progress is happening, whether you feel it or not. Now, here's a powerful truth. Most people don't fail because they lack ability. They fail because they lack patience. They want results before they deserve them. They want outcomes without consistency, and when it doesn't happen fast enough, they quit. But the ones who win stay. They stay when it's boring. They stay when it's slow. They stay when nobody notices, because they understand something deeper. Time rewards discipline, not urgency. Now imagine yourself 1 year from now. If you stay consistent, if you protect your system, if you keep allocating every single month, what changes? Not overnight, but gradually. Your security grows, your growth compounds, your stress reduces, and suddenly you're not in the same position anymore, not because of one big decision, because of many small ones. Repeated. Now let me give you a line to carry forward. The people who win with money are the ones who don't quit during the quiet phase, because the quiet phase is where separation happens, where most people leave and a few continue. Now here's where it gets even more important, because while you're waiting, while you're building, there is something else happening. Your identity is changing. You're no longer reacting. You're no longer guessing. You're becoming someone who is in control. And in the next chapter, we're going to talk about that shift, because managing money is not just about numbers, it's about who you become in the process. And once that identity locks in, everything becomes easier. Chapter 12. Becoming the person who controls money. At the beginning, this was about money, tracking it, dividing it, controlling it. But somewhere along the way, something deeper started to happen. You changed, not dramatically, not overnight, but subtly, in the way you think, in the way you pause, in the way you decide, because managing money is never just about money, it's about identity. And identity is what determines whether this lasts or disappears. Now think about this. Two people can have the exact same system, the same structure, the same knowledge, the same income, but one keeps it and the other loses it. Why? Because one becomes the type of person who naturally lives in control, and the other is still reacting internally, trying to force behavior without changing identity. And that never lasts, because behavior without identity feels like effort, and effort eventually fades. But identity feels natural. Now let's go deeper. At the start, you had to remind yourself to track. You had to force yourself to pause. You had to think before spending. It felt unnatural. It felt like work. But now, something is shifting. You start noticing things automatically. You start questioning decisions without effort. You start feeling discomfort when something doesn't align. That's identity. That's the moment where control stops being something you do and becomes something you are. Now here's the truth most people don't hear. You don't build wealth by following rules. You build wealth by becoming the type of person who doesn't break them. That's the difference, because rules can be ignored, but identity is consistent. Now imagine this. You walk into a store. You see something you want. Old, you react instantly, justifies it, buys it, moves on. But now there's a pause, not forced, natural. You think, where does this fit? And if it doesn't, you don't feel restricted. You feel clear. That's power. That's control. That's identity. Now here's something even deeper. Your identity affects more than spending. It affects how you earn, how you negotiate, how you take opportunities, how you think about growth. Because when you see yourself as someone in control, you act differently. You don't settle. You don't panic. You don't chase. You decide. And decisions shape outcomes. Now let me give you a line to hold on to. You don't control money until you control who you are with it, because money amplifies identity. If you're reactive, it magnifies chaos. If you're disciplined, it multiplies control. So the goal is not just to manage money better, it's to become someone who naturally respects it. Now here's where it becomes real. This identity is built in small moments, not big ones. The decision to not break your system, the decision to track when you don't feel like it, the decision to stay consistent when no one sees it. That's where it forms, quietly, layer by layer, until one day you realize something. You're no longer trying. You're operating, and that's when everything accelerates, because now your system is not just external, it's internal. Now here's the next shift. Because once your identity aligns, something interesting happens. You start seeing opportunities that you didn't notice before, not because they weren't there, because you weren't ready to see them. And in the next chapter, we're going to explore that, because control creates clarity, and clarity opens doors most people walk past every day. Dear viewers, write in the comments what you'd like us to talk about in the next video. We promise to read all the comments and pick the best and most relevant topics. Thanks. Chapter 13, Seeing What Others Ignore. There is a quiet advantage That doesn't come from luck or connections or even intelligence. It comes from clarity. And clarity is what you've been building this entire time. Because once you control your money, once you understand your behavior, once you stop reacting and start deciding, something changes in the way you see the world. You begin to notice things that were always there, but invisible to you before. Opportunities, not loud ones, not obvious ones, subtle ones. Because opportunities rarely announce themselves. They don't knock on your door and say, "This will change your life." They appear quietly, in conversations, in ideas, in patterns most people ignore. But here's the truth. You cannot recognize opportunity if your life is chaotic. If your money is scattered, your mind is scattered. If your decisions are reactive, your attention is reactive. And reactive people miss everything. The 1% don't just have more opportunities, they see more. Because they are not distracted. They are not overwhelmed. They are not constantly solving problems created by poor control. They have space, and space creates awareness. Now imagine this. Two people walk into the same situation, same environment, same conversation, same possibilities. One is thinking about bills, about stress, about survival. The other is calm, focused, observing. Who do you think sees more? Who do you think recognizes patterns? Who do you think notices value? That's the difference, not intelligence, state. Because your state determines what you can see. Now let's connect this to your money. When your finances are controlled, you are not constantly reacting. You're not chasing the next paycheck. You're not stressed about unexpected costs. You have breathing room, and in that space, your awareness expands. You start asking better questions. You start noticing inefficiencies, gaps, possibilities. You start thinking, how can this be improved? How can this be built? How can this create value? And that's where opportunity lives, not in chaos, in clarity. Now here's something powerful. Opportunities don't appear randomly. They align with preparation. If you are not prepared, you won't recognize them. If you are not ready, you won't act on them. And if you're distracted, you won't even see them. That's why control is so important, because it prepares you, not just financially, mentally, emotionally. Now imagine this version of you. You've built your system. You've stayed consistent. You've developed discipline. And now an opportunity appears, a chance to invest, a chance to build something, a chance to move. Old you hesitates, doubts, overthinks. Because there is no structure, no confidence, but this version of you is different. You evaluate calmly, logically. You don't rush, you don't panic, you decide. And that decision comes from clarity. Now let me give you a line to remember. Opportunities are invisible to people who are distracted by chaos, because chaos consumes attention, and attention is what allows you to see. Now, here's the deeper layer. Opportunity is not always external. Sometimes it's internal. It's realizing you can earn differently, that you can build something, that you can shift direction. But most people never act on that because they're too busy surviving, too busy reacting, too busy staying afloat. And that's why control matters so much, because it lifts you out of survival and places you into awareness. Now here's where everything connects. You started with money, with structure, with discipline. But what you're really building is perspective, the ability to see clearly, to think ahead, to recognize value. And once you have that, your life starts to expand, not randomly, intentionally. Now, in the next chapter, we're going to go even deeper into this idea, because seeing opportunity is one thing. Acting on it is another. And most people hesitate right at the moment it matters most, because action requires confidence, and confidence comes from something you've been building quietly this entire time. Chapter 14, the moment you decide there is a moment. It doesn't look special. It doesn't feel dramatic. No music, no signal, no confirmation that this is it. But everything depends on it. The moment you decide to act, not think, not plan, not wait, act. Because here's the truth most people avoid. Seeing opportunity means nothing if you don't move on it. And movement is where fear shows up again. Doubt, overthinking, second-guessing. What if it doesn't work? What if I'm wrong? What if I lose? And just like that, the same mind that recognized the opportunity starts trying to protect you from it. This is where most people stop. Not because the opportunity wasn't real, because they hesitated, because they waited for certainty. But certainty never comes before action. It comes after. The 1% understand this deeply. They don't wait to feel ready. They prepare. Then they move, not blindly, not recklessly, but decisively, because they know something most people don't. Indecision is more expensive than a mistake. Let that land, because while you're waiting, while you're overthinking, time is moving, opportunities are shifting, conditions are changing, and the window is closing. Now let's go deeper. Why do people hesitate? It's not lack of knowledge, it's lack of trust. Trust in themselves, trust in their system, trust in their ability to recover, even if things don't go perfectly. And that's why everything you've built so far matters. Because control creates trust. You've tracked your money, you've structured your system, you've stayed consistent. You've proven something to yourself, that you can operate with discipline, that you can handle responsibility, that you can make decisions and follow through. And that proof becomes confidence, not fake confidence, not loud confidence, quiet certainty. Now imagine this. You see an opportunity, old you freezes, analyzes endlessly, waits for the perfect moment, and misses it. But this version of you is different. You evaluate quickly. You understand your position. You know your limits. You know your capacity. And then you decide, not perfectly, but clearly. That's the shift from hesitation to movement. Now here's something important. Taking action does not mean everything will work. It doesn't guarantee success. But it guarantees something more valuable: progress, learning, experience, because every action teaches you something, refines your thinking, sharpens your decisions, and over time, that compounds, just like money does. Now let me give you a line to carry forward. You don't become confident before you act. You become confident because you act. That's the difference. Because confidence is not built in theory, it's built in motion. Now, here's the deeper layer. Action requires boundaries. Not every opportunity is yours. Not every path is right, and that's where your system protects you. Because you don't act emotionally. You act within structure, within clarity, within control. So when you move, you're not gambling. You're deciding, and that distinction changes everything. Now imagine where this leads. You're no longer just controlling money. You're directing it. You're no longer reacting to life. You're shaping it, because every decision is intentional. Now here's the transition. Because once you start acting, once you start moving, once you start creating momentum, there is something that will try to pull you back. Something subtle, something powerful, comfort. Because in the next chapter, we're going to talk about what happens when things start working and the temptation to relax begins to creep in, because growth doesn't stop from failure alone. Sometimes it stops from comfort. Chapter 15, The Trap of Comfort. At the beginning, everything felt difficult. Tracking your money, controlling your spending, building your system. It required effort, attention, discipline. You had to think about every decision. You had to remind yourself constantly, and that struggle was necessary because it forced you to grow. But now, something has changed. Things feel easier. You understand your system. You move with more clarity. You don't feel the same chaos you used to. And for the first time, there is space, calm, control. And this is where a new danger appears. Not failure, not confusion, comfort, because comfort feels like success. It feels like you've made it, like you can relax now, like you can loosen your grip, and slowly, subtly, you begin to ease off. You stop tracking as closely. You allow small exceptions again. You tell yourself, I've got this now, and nothing breaks immediately, which makes it even more dangerous because it feels safe. But what's actually happening is erosion, slow, silent, unnoticed, because systems don't collapse overnight. They weaken gradually, and comfort is what weakens them. Now let's be clear. You are not supposed to live in constant tension. You are not supposed to feel pressure every day. But you are also not supposed to become careless, because control is not something you achieve once. It's something you maintain daily, quietly, consistently. The 1% understand this deeply. They don't stop paying attention just because things are working. They stay aware, not obsessively, but intentionally, because they know what got you here is what keeps you here. And the moment you forget that, you begin to slip. Now let's go deeper. Comfort creates blindness. It makes you think small deviations don't matter. That skipping one step is fine. That breaking one rule is harmless. But you've already learned this. That's how patterns begin. That's how systems break. Not through big mistakes, through repeated small ones. Now imagine this. You've built your structure. You've created discipline. You've started seeing progress. And then you relax too much. Not all at once, just a little, and then a little more, until one day you realize something. You're not as sharp as you were. You're not as aware as before. You're not as controlled as you felt. And the gap is back. That's the trap. Because comfort makes regression feel invisible. Now here's the shift. Comfort is not the goal. Stability is. And stability requires awareness. It requires you to stay connected to your system, not tightly, but consistently. Now, let me give you a line to remember. Comfort is earned, but control must be maintained, because once you stop maintaining, you slowly return, not to where you started immediately, but in direction, and direction is what determines everything. Now, here's how you balance it. You don't remove comfort. You earn it through structure, through discipline, through consistency. Because when your system is strong, you can enjoy your life without fear, without guilt, without losing control. That's real freedom, not spending without thinking, but knowing you can spend because everything else is handled. Now imagine this version of you. You enjoy your life. You spend within your structure. You feel calm about your money. But at the same time, you stay aware. You don't drift. You don't ignore. You don't forget. That balance is where mastery lives. Now here's where we go next. Because even with control, even with discipline, even with awareness, There is still one more layer, one more shift. Because money is not just about managing or even growing. It's about what it allows you to become. And in the next chapter, we're going to talk about that. Because true control is not just financial, it's personal. It changes how you think, how you move, and how you live. And once you reach that level, money is no longer the goal. It becomes a tool for something much bigger. Chapter 16, Money as a Mirror. At the beginning, money felt like a problem to solve, something to fix, something to control, something that caused stress, confusion, pressure. But now, if you've stayed with this journey, you start to see something different. Money was never the real issue. It was the mirror, reflecting everything underneath: your habits, your discipline, your patience, your identity. Because money doesn't create who you are, it reveals it. If you are reactive, it exposes chaos. If you are disciplined, it reflects control. If you are unclear, it amplifies confusion. And that's why two people with the same income can live completely different lives. Because the difference is not money. It's the person handling it. Now think about this. Every financial decision you make is not just about the money. It's about you, how you think, how you feel, how you respond under pressure. Do you react or pause? Do you justify or question? Do you drift or decide? And over time, those answers build a pattern, and that pattern builds your life. Now here's the shift. Stop seeing money as something external. Start seeing it as feedback. Because every time something goes wrong, it's showing you something, not to judge you, to reveal you. Now imagine this. You overspend. Old mindset says, I need more money. New mindset asks, what led to that decision? Was it emotion, impulse, lack of awareness? Because when you ask that question, you stop blaming. You start learning, and learning is what creates control. Now, let's go deeper. Money tests you, not once, constantly. It tests your patience when results are slow. It tests your discipline when temptation appears. It tests your identity when things get comfortable. And every time, you respond. And that response strengthens or weakens you. Now here's the powerful part. You can use this. You can turn every financial decision into self-awareness. Every purchase becomes a question. Every mistake becomes a lesson. Every success becomes reinforcement. And over time, you don't just improve your money, you improve yourself. Now let me give you a line to carry forward. Your financial life is a reflection of your internal discipline, because money follows behavior, always. Now imagine who you become if you stay consistent with this: calm under pressure, clear in decisions, focused in direction. That doesn't just affect your finances, it affects everything: your work, your relationships, your opportunities. Because you are no longer reacting, you are operating. Now here's the deeper layer. When you stop chasing money and start mastering yourself, money starts aligning, not magically, logically. Because your decisions improve, your opportunities increase, your mistakes decrease, and everything compounds. Now imagine this version of your life. You're not stressed about money. You're not confused about decisions. You're not reacting to every situation. You're stable, grounded, in control. And that control extends beyond finances. It becomes part of who you are. Now here's where everything shifts again. Because once you reach this level, you stop asking, how do I manage money? And start asking, what do I want my money to do for my life? because money is no longer the goal. It becomes a tool, a resource, a way to create something bigger. And in the next chapter, we're going to explore that, because control is powerful, growth is important, but purpose is what gives everything meaning. And without it, even success feels empty. Chapter 17, When Money Meets Purpose. There comes a point where control is no longer enough, where growth is no longer exciting on its own, where numbers stop being the goal, because once you learn how to manage money, once you learn how to grow it, once you realize you are in control, a deeper question appears. What is this all for? And most people never answer that. They stay focused on accumulation. More income, more growth, more numbers. But without purpose, more never feels like enough. Because money without direction becomes empty. Now let's pause here, because this is where everything matures. Up until now, you've been building control, structure, discipline, awareness, and that was necessary. But now you move into intention, because money is not just something you manage, it's something you direct, and direction requires clarity. Now imagine this. You've built stability. You've created growth. You're no longer reacting to your finances. But you don't know why you're doing it. You don't know what you're building toward, so you keep going. But something feels off, because progress without purpose feels like motion without meaning. And meaning is what sustains everything. The 1% understand this differently. They don't just accumulate. They allocate with intention. They ask, what does this allow me to create? What does this give me access to? What kind of life am I building? Because money is not the end. It's the tool. Now, here's the shift. Stop asking, how much can I grow? Start asking, what do I want my money to support? Freedom, time, experiences, impact. Because once you define that, your decisions become sharper. Your system becomes aligned. Your growth becomes meaningful. Now let's go deeper. Purpose changes how you spend, because now spending is not random, it's intentional. You're not just buying things, you're choosing experiences, you're creating memories, you're investing in what matters to you. And that shift removes guilt, because you're not escaping, you're aligning. Now imagine this. You use your lifestyle category not to fill gaps, not to chase feelings, but to support what you value. Travel that expands your perspective, experiences that strengthen your relationships, moments that actually matter. That's different. That's not consumption. That's direction. Now let's go even deeper. Purpose also changes how you grow, because growth is no longer just about numbers. It's about possibility. What doors does this open? What choices does this create? What version of your life becomes available? And suddenly, money becomes empowering, not stressful, not confusing, clear. Now let me give you a line to anchor this. Money without purpose creates pressure. Money with purpose creates direction, because direction removes confusion. It removes hesitation. It removes wasted movement. Now here's something important. Purpose is personal. It's not what others expect. It's not what looks impressive. It's what matters to you. And that requires honesty, because if you don't define it, you will follow someone else's version, and that leads back to drift. Now imagine your life with clarity. You know what you're building. You know what you're moving toward. You know why your system exists. And every decision reinforces that. That's where fulfillment lives. Not in the amount, in the alignment. Now here's where everything connects. Control gave you structure. Growth gave you leverage. Purpose gives you direction. And together, they create something powerful. A life that is not reactive, not accidental, intentional. Now, in the next chapter, we're going to bring everything together. Because understanding is one thing. Execution over the long term is what creates real transformation. And there is one final shift that determines whether this stays with you or fades over time. Chapter 18. The Standard You Refuse to Break. There is one final shift that determines everything, not your system, not your income, not even your knowledge, your standard, because at the end of the day, you don't rise to your goals, you fall to your standards, and that's where most people lose everything they built, not in one moment, but slowly, quietly. When they lower the standard, they stop tracking, they stop paying attention, they stop respecting the system, not completely, just a little, and that little becomes the beginning of regression. Now let's go deeper. A standard is different from a goal. A goal is something you aim for. A standard is something you live by. A goal says, I want to be financially free. A standard says, I don't spend without intention. A goal is external. A standard is internal, and internal is what lasts. Now imagine this. You've built everything. Control, discipline, awareness, purpose. But you don't define your standard. What happens? Eventually, you drift. Because without a standard, there is no anchor, no baseline, no line you refuse to cross, and life will test that constantly. Now here's the shift. You decide your standard, not once, daily, in small moments. You decide, I don't break my system. I don't spend without clarity. I don't react emotionally, and over time, those decisions become automatic. Now let's be clear, this is not about perfection. You will make mistakes. You will have moments where you slip. That's human. But your standard is what brings you back immediately, without delay, without excuses, because the difference between someone who stays in control and someone who loses it is not mistakes, it's recovery. Now imagine this. You make a wrong decision. Old, you ignores it, justifies it, repeats it. But this version of you sees it, corrects it, realigns. That's the difference. That's the standard. Now let me give you a line to carry forward. You don't lose control in one mistake. You lose it when you stop correcting it, because correction is what keeps the system alive. Now here's the deeper layer. Your standard affects everything, not just money. How you use your time, how you handle opportunities, how you show up in your life. Because once you set a standard, it spreads into every area. Now imagine living like this, not perfectly, but intentionally. You know your boundaries. You know your system. You know your direction. And every day, you reinforce it. That's power. Not loud, not visible, but real. Now here's where everything connects. You started with confusion, with uncertainty, with lack of control. And step by step, you built clarity, structure, discipline, and now you have something most people never develop, a standard. And that standard is what protects everything. Now in the next chapter, we're going to bring this journey to a deeper level, because there is one final realization that separates those who maintain control from those who master it completely. And it's not about money at all. It's about awareness, the kind that changes how you see everything. Chapter 19, the awareness that changes everything. At some point, if you've truly followed this journey, if you've stayed present through every shift, you begin to notice something subtle, a kind of awareness. That wasn't there before. Not just about money, about everything. Because what you really been building was never just financial control. It was awareness. And awareness is what separates those who react to life from those who shape it. Now let's slow this down. Before, most of your decisions were automatic. You spent without thinking, you reacted without pausing, you followed patterns, you didn't question. And that felt normal, because when you're not aware, everything feels normal, even if it's limiting you. But now, you pause, you observe, you question, not forcefully, naturally, and that shift is everything, because awareness creates distance. Distance between impulse and action, between emotion and decision, between reaction and control, and in that distance, you choose. Now think about that carefully. Before, your life was happening to you. Now, you are happening to your life. That's the difference. Now let's connect this deeper. Awareness doesn't just improve your finances, it changes how you see time. You start noticing where it goes, where it's wasted, where it's invested. You stop saying, I don't have time. You start asking, where is my time going? That's awareness. It changes how you see energy. What drains you, what builds you, what you allow, and what you protect. That's awareness. It changes how you see people, who supports your growth, who distracts you, who aligns with your direction. That's awareness. And it all started with money, because money forced you to look closer, to pay attention, to question patterns. And once you learned that skill, you applied it everywhere. Now here's the truth most people never realize. Control is not about restriction. It's about clarity. Because when you see clearly, you don't need rules. You don't need force. You choose better naturally. Now imagine this version of you. You walk through your day aware, not overwhelmed, not distracted, not reactive. You see your decisions before you make them. You understand your patterns. You control your direction. That's a different life. Not louder, not flashier, but deeper, stronger. Now let me give you a line to hold on to. Awareness turns everything you do into a choice, and choice is where freedom lives. Now here's where everything connects. You started by controlling your money, then you controlled your habits, then your identity shifted, then your perspective expanded, and now you see clearly that this was never just about finances, it was about becoming someone who is awake. Now, here's the final realization. Most people are not stuck because they lack opportunity. They're stuck because they lack awareness. They move without seeing. They act without thinking. They repeat without questioning. And that cycle keeps them where they are. But you broke that cycle because you slowed down. You paid attention. You chose differently, and that changes everything. Now, in the next chapter, we bring this to its final form, because awareness is powerful. But there is one last step. That turns it into something permanent, something unshakable, something that stays with you, no matter what changes around you. Chapter 20, The Unshakable Core. There is a final stage where everything you've built stops feeling like effort and becomes part of you. Not something you practice, not something you remember, something you are. This is where awareness becomes identity, where control becomes natural, where discipline becomes automatic. And once you reach this point, nothing outside of you can easily shake what's inside of you. Now let's slow this down, because this is the difference between temporary change and permanent transformation. Most people change for a moment. They get motivated, they try something new, They improve briefly, but then life happens. Stress, distraction, pressure, and they return to who they were. Why? Because the change never reached their core. It stayed on the surface, behavior without identity. And surface-level change never survives pressure. But what you've been building is different. You didn't just learn what to do. You changed how you think, how you respond, how you see, and that changes everything. Now imagine this. Something unexpected happens. An expense you didn't plan for, a shift in your income, a moment of uncertainty. Old you reacts, stress, panic, confusion, but this version of you is steady. You pause, you assess, you adjust. Because your system is not fragile, it's flexible. Because your identity is not reactive, it's grounded. That's the unshakable core. Now here's the truth. Most people never reach. Stability is not about what happens to you. It's about how you respond. And response comes from identity. Now let's go deeper. This core is built in repetition. Every time you chose awareness over impulse, every time you chose discipline over emotion, every time you chose consistency over comfort, you reinforced something, not just a habit, a standard, a way of operating. And over time, that became who you are. Now here's the powerful part. Once something becomes part of your identity, it no longer requires energy. You don't struggle to follow your system. You don't fight yourself constantly. You don't feel like you're forcing change. You simply operate. And that's freedom, not from money, from internal conflict. Now let me give you a line to carry forward. You are truly in control when doing the right thing no longer feels like effort. Because effort fades, but identity remains. Now, imagine your life from this place. You don't fear money. You don't avoid it. You don't feel overwhelmed by it. You understand it. You direct it. You respect it. And because of that, it supports you. Now, here's where everything connects. You started with awareness. You built control. You created structure. You developed discipline. You aligned with purpose. You raised your standard, and now you've built something deeper, a core, something stable, something reliable, something that doesn't depend on circumstances, and that is what most people spend their entire lives searching for. Now here's the transition, because this is not the end, it's the beginning. Because once you become this person, you don't just maintain your life, you expand it. And in the next chapter, we're going to step into that expansion because control is powerful. But what you do with that control is what defines everything that comes next. Chapter 21, Expansion Without Losing Control. There is a moment where everything you've built starts to open doors. Not because something magical happened, but because you became ready. Ready to handle more, ready to see more, ready to move differently. And this is where expansion begins. But here's the truth most people never hear. Expansion is dangerous if you forget your foundation. Because growth without control leads back to chaos. And the higher you go, the faster you can fall. Now, let's slow this down. You've built structure, you've built discipline, you've built awareness, and now opportunities increase. Income may grow, options may expand, decisions become bigger. And in that moment, you face a new test, not survival, not control, scale. Because it's one thing to manage $1,000 with discipline. It's another to manage $10,000, $50,000, $100,000 with the same level of clarity. And most people fail here, not because they lack knowledge, because they abandon the basics. They think, I don't need the system anymore. I understand this now. I can handle it. And slowly, they let go of the structure. They stop assigning. They stop tracking. They rely on feeling instead of clarity. And just like that, they return to drift at a higher level. That's the danger, because bigger numbers don't forgive small mistakes. They amplify them. Now imagine two paths again. One person expands, but keeps their system. They scale their structure. They maintain their standards. They stay aware. The other expands without discipline, relies on intuition, ignores small leaks, breaks consistency. 5 years later, the difference is massive, not because of income, because of control. Now here's the shift. Expansion does not require new principles. It requires stronger consistency, because what works at a small level works at a large level, if you respect it. Now imagine this version of you. Your income grows, but your system grows with it. Your percentages stay aligned. Your awareness stays sharp. Your discipline stays consistent. Nothing changes except the scale. And because of that, your growth becomes stable, sustainable, controlled. Now let me give you a line to anchor this. Growth tests your discipline more than your ability, because ability got you here. Discipline keeps you here. Now here's the deeper layer. Expansion is not just financial, it's personal. You start thinking bigger, seeing bigger, moving differently. And that can be overwhelming if you're not grounded. But because you built your core, you don't get lost. You stay centered. Now imagine opportunities increasing around you, more decisions, more options, more pressure. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, you feel clear, because your system filters everything. You don't chase everything, you choose. And that is the difference between growth and chaos. Now, here's where everything connects. Control gave you stability. Growth gave you leverage. Purpose gave you direction. Awareness gave you clarity. And now, expansion gives you possibility, but only if you protect everything underneath it. Now here's the transition, because expansion is powerful, but it's not the final stage. There is one more level, one that very few people reach, because it requires something deeper than discipline. It requires responsibility. Because in the next chapter, we're going to talk about what happens when your control doesn't just affect you anymore, but starts to influence others, and that is where true power begins. Chapter 22. When control becomes influence, there is a shift. That happens quietly. You don't announce it. You don't even notice it at first. But the way you move starts affecting others, not because you're trying to lead, but because control is visible. People can feel it in the way you make decisions, in the way you speak about money, in the way you don't react under pressure. They notice something different: calm, clarity, confidence, and without saying a word, you begin to influence. Now let's be clear. This is not about status. This is not about showing off. This is about presence, because when you become someone who is in control, people around you start questioning their own patterns. They start noticing their habits, their decisions, their lack of structure, and sometimes they ask, how do you do it? How do you stay so calm about money? How do you always seem in control? And in that moment, you realize something. You're no longer just living differently, you're becoming an example. Now here's the deeper truth. Influence is not about telling people what to do. It's about showing them what's possible. Because most people don't change from advice. They change from exposure. Seeing someone operate differently opens something in their mind. It makes them think, maybe I can do that too. And that is powerful. Now imagine this. Someone close to you is struggling financially, mentally, emotionally, and instead of reacting, instead of giving surface-level advice, you respond from clarity. You ask better questions. You guide them to awareness. You show them structure, not forcefully, naturally, because it's who you are now. And slowly, they start to shift, not because you told them to, because you showed them how. That's influence. Now let's go deeper. With influence comes responsibility, because your actions set a standard, whether you realize it or not. If you stay disciplined, it reinforces the possibility. If you lose control, it reinforces the opposite. And that's why your standard matters, not just for you, but for those watching. Now, this doesn't mean pressure. It doesn't mean perfection. It means awareness, understanding that how you operate creates ripples. Now, let me give you a line to carry forward. You don't just control your money. You shape what others believe is possible, because people learn from what they see, not just what they hear. Now imagine your environment shifting. Conversations change, perspectives change, habits begin to align, not all at once, but gradually, because one person chose to operate differently, and that person is you. Now here's where everything connects. You started this journey for yourself, to gain control, to build stability, to create growth. But what you built extends beyond you, because real control doesn't isolate, it elevates. Now here's the transition, because influence is powerful. But there is one final level, the level where everything becomes complete, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet realization. Because in the next chapter, we bring everything together, not as concepts, not as systems, but as a way of living. And once you see it clearly, you will understand. That control was never the destination. It was the foundation for something much bigger. Chapter 23, the life you now live. At the start, this felt like a problem, something to fix, something to figure out, something that caused stress, confusion, pressure. But now, if you've stayed all the way through, you see it differently. This was never just about money. It was about how you live, because look at what has changed. You don't react the same way anymore. You don't spend without thinking. You don't feel lost in your own decisions. You pause, you observe, you decide. And that is a different life, not louder, not more complicated, but clearer, stronger, intentional. Now imagine your daily routine. You wake up not thinking about what you lack, but aware of what you control. You move through your day, not reacting to every impulse, but choosing what deserves your attention. You make decisions, not based on emotion, but based on clarity. That's not just financial control, that's personal mastery. Now let's go deeper. Before, money created tension. You avoided it. You guessed your way through it. You hoped things would work out. Now, money feels neutral. It's not emotional. It's not overwhelming. It's a tool. And because you understand it, it no longer controls you. Now here's something powerful. This way of living spreads into everything. You handle time differently. You handle relationships differently. You handle pressure differently, because you've trained yourself to be aware. And awareness changes everything. Now imagine this. A situation appears unexpected. Old, you react immediately. Stress, emotion, impulse. But now, there's space. You pause. You assess. You choose, and that one difference changes the outcome every time. Now let me give you a line to carry forward. A controlled life is not built on big moments, but on small, consistent awareness. Because it's not what you do once, it's what you repeat daily. Now here's the deeper realization. You are no longer chasing control, you are living it. And that means you don't need constant reminders, you don't need external pressure, you don't need motivation, because it's part of you now. And when something is part of you, it doesn't disappear. Now imagine looking back at the version of you who started this. Confused, reactive, uncertain. And now, look at where you are. Clear, grounded, in control. That gap was not created by luck. It was created by awareness, by discipline, by choosing differently over and over again. Now here's where everything becomes complete. Because this is no longer about learning something new. It's about continuing what you've already built. And that continuation is what defines your future. Now in the next chapter, we close this journey, not with an ending, but with something stronger, a commitment, a decision, a standard you carry forward beyond this moment. Because everything you've learned only matters if you choose to live it. Chapter 24, the decision that defines everything. There is a final moment, and it's not loud. It's not dramatic. It doesn't come with pressure or urgency. It's quiet, but it defines everything. The decision to continue. Because everything you've heard, everything you've built, everything you've understood means nothing if it stays here. If it stays as an idea, as a moment of clarity, as something that felt powerful but wasn't applied. Because information does not change your life. Decisions do. Now let's slow this down. You've learned how to control your money. You've built structure. You've developed discipline. You've shifted your identity. You've expanded your awareness. But now, you face the simplest and hardest question of all. Will you live this or leave this? Because most people don't fail from lack of knowledge. They fail from lack of continuation. They start strong. They feel motivated. They change for a moment. And then they drift. Back to old habits. Back to automatic decisions. Back to unconscious patterns. Not because they wanted to, because they didn't decide to make it permanent. Now here's the truth. Change is not built in moments of motivation. It's built in moments of repetition. When it's boring, when it's quiet, when nobody is watching, that's where it becomes real. Now imagine two versions of you. One feels inspired right now, but tomorrow goes back to old patterns, forgets to track, stops paying attention, lets small decisions slide, and slowly everything fades. The other makes a decision, not emotional, not temporary, clear. I live this now. And from that moment, everything changes, not overnight, but consistently. They track, they pause, they decide, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's boring. And over time, it becomes permanent. That's the difference. Not knowledge. Commitment. Now let me give you a line to anchor this. You don't need more information. You need a decision you refuse to break. Because once you decide, you stop negotiating. You stop asking, should I? You already know. Now here's the deeper layer. This decision is not about perfection. It's about direction. You will have off days. You will make mistakes, but your direction does not change. You correct. You realign. You continue. And that is what builds a different life. Now imagine waking up tomorrow, not trying to remember what you learned, but living it naturally, without hesitation, because you decided that this is who you are now, not temporarily, permanently. Now here's where everything connects. You didn't just learn how to manage money. You learned how to manage yourself, your attention, your behavior, your decisions, and those skills apply to everything. Now here's the final shift. Stop thinking of this as something you started. Start seeing it as something you continue. Because there is no finish line. There is only consistency. Now, in the final chapter, we close this journey, not with an ending, but with something that stays with you long after this is over. A single idea, a single truth, a single line. That defines everything you've just built. Chapter 25, Control is Who You Become. At the very beginning, this felt like a money problem, something external, something to fix, something outside of you. But now, you see it clearly. It was never about money. It was about you. Because money didn't change your life. You did. Through awareness, through discipline, through decisions made quietly, repeatedly, intentionally. And what you built goes far beyond finances. Now pause for a moment. Look at who you are now. You don't drift the same way. You don't react the same way. You don't ignore the same things. You see, you think, you decide, and that is control, not forced, not temporary, natural, because control is not something you apply. It's something you become. Now let's go deeper. You used to chase clarity. Now you operate from it. You used to feel overwhelmed. Now you feel grounded. You used to react to money. Now you direct it. And that shift changes everything. Because when you are in control, you don't need to rely on luck. You don't need to hope things work out. You build outcomes intentionally. Now imagine your life moving forward, not perfectly, but clearly. You make decisions with awareness. You protect your system without effort. You grow without losing control. And no matter what changes around you, your core stays the same. That's power. Now let me give you the final line, the one that defines everything you've learned. Control every dollar, and you will never lose control of your life, because money was just the starting point. The real transformation was internal. Now before this ends, take a second. Not to feel motivated, not to feel inspired, but to decide. Decide that this is not temporary. Decide that this is not something you try. Decide that this is who you are now, because that decision is what carries everything forward. Now, if this journey spoke to you, make it real, not for me, for you. Hit like as a contract with yourself that you will not go back to unconscious decisions. Drop a comment with one thing you're committing to change, so you make it visible and real. Subscribe, not for content, but for consistency, because staying in environments that reinforce your growth is how you protect it. And if someone in your life needs this, share it, because sometimes one idea at the right moment changes everything. Now take a breath, because this isn't the end. It's the beginning of how you live from here. And the next question is yours to answer. What do you want your control to build next